Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or Blockchain Brad, and today, as promised, this is part 2 of an interview that I've done recently with Matt Spoke. He is the CEO of AION and also of the OAN, which is something that many people are talking about right now. Matt, thank you very much for your time to do this, second part.
It's good to be back, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, mate. Now, a lot of people are talking about all the innovations, all the development. The OAN, it's on the tips of everyone's tongue. Just to remind us really quickly once again, Matt, what does that stand for, that acronym, and why is it so key to the developments from AION?
Yeah, the OAN is the Open Application Network. This is a big kind of pivot we went through in the AION project over the last month, something we've been working on for the past half year, but we announced it at the beginning of November. Effectively, it's a kind of extension of our current protocol, the work that we've been doing on the AION protocol, and a set of tools that we're building on top of that. We've rebranded it to really start addressing the target market that we want to go after. And the target market that we're focusing on is a solution space we're calling open applications, but it's companies that operate within the ecosystems of online marketplaces. So imagine companies interacting with companies like Shopify or platforms like YouTube or platforms like Uber. And the characteristics of these businesses, what they all have in common, and the problems that exist within that space. And so we're very much targeting our go-to-market strategy towards like businesses operating inside of those like online gig economy platforms. And so that was kind of the main driver behind the Open Application Network kind of narrative, is to get people talking about the types of solutions we could build that are different than the decentralized apps being built in other blockchain protocol ecosystems of our industry.
Yep, and mate, it's good to know, because obviously as we move forward towards 2020, there's a lot of discussion among all of the startups actually about the imperative of utility, starting to show that empirical proof. And you're saying that there was a dearth of that when we last spoke, that there was a real lack of discussion about proving the worth of applications. So you already mentioned quite a few in the pipeline as well, Matt. There's quite a lot going on with the OAN already. So just give us a brief update on where you're positioned in the roadmap.
Yeah, I mean, the big announcement in November was kind of twofold. One, we wanted people to understand, where we were taking the project over the course of the next few years, to really clarify who's our audience going to be, who's the users that we're chasing after, what types of applications are we interested in solving problems with. And so that really opens up a very new category of target customers, if I could put it that way. It doesn't take away from the fact that AION is still the digital asset that underpins the system. So if you're wondering about the relationship between these two things, the way we've kind of framed it is the Open Application Network is the go-to-market brand against user adoption. And we're talking about platform problems and online market ecosystems. And then underpinning that system is the crypto economics of AION, the way people stake on the system, mine on the system, help participate in building confidence in the underlying asset for the overall security of the network long term. And so there's still a lot going on the AION side, so to speak, but these are now very, very much two parts of the same strategy. When we started playing around...
Sorry, you go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, just to finish your question, when we went through the list of what we've identified as being very, very common thematic problems that we think a lot of these online marketplaces are experiencing, we categorized them into a couple of high-level problem statements. And against those, we started building templates of solutions and tools that we needed to build. So one of those, we published kind of 4 that we're in the process of developing. One's called Open Economy, one's called Open Governance, Open Identity, and Open Funding. And they all address a different subsegment of these platform problems that we researched and kind of identified and observed when we were digging into some of these ecosystems.
Yeah, and mate, it makes a lot of sense, because obviously that AION infrastructure is key. You spent several years on that. You wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but really, like your literature says, it's about creating another branch of the overall, approach that you're taking to really, I guess, bolster, and showcase more of the value of applications, especially when we see more and more people in the mainstream start to pay attention to the value propositions of many of these startups, and including yours as well. So how's the feedback been so far as you move forward with OAN in that sense? Because as a CEO, you're talking, no doubt, to a lot of stakeholders in the mainstream sector.
Yeah, I mean, the last month has been extremely busy since we last spoke. I don't know, I think it was right after the announcement. So it's been about 3 or 4 weeks now. We've been on the road for for the entire month of November. I just got back on Saturday from being in Helsinki, Finland, which was probably a very, very interesting coming out for us, because we were at a conference called Slush, which is a very, very mainstream tech startup festival in Helsinki, the largest of its kind in Europe. And what was unique about this event, it was the first time we've ever gone to an event that was not cryptocurrency blockchain focused audience. It was a technical online businesses, startup, generic tech conference. And so when we were walking through our narrative with people, talking to them about the types of solutions that we're building, we were gauging their reactions as people who knew nothing about us, had no background context on us. So it wasn't like trying to convince somebody of why AION was changing to the OAN. These were people that had never heard us in any context. So we had to kind of, work the narrative to a new audience and see how they would react to it. And I have to say, we did that for 3 days in Helsinki, and we were really blown away by people's reactions. There was a lot of really, really positive feedback. And out of that and other activities like it that we're going to be...
Sorry, I just lost you for a second there, Matt. Can you just repeat that again? So going back to Helsinki and the responses.
Yeah, we were blown away. It was extremely positive. The goal of Helsinki and other events like it as we move into 2020 will be to find companies to pick up what we're putting down, build solutions with the tools that we're publishing. In some cases, we will co-create some solutions with high priority companies that we think have like a really, really compelling case study of one of the narratives that we're talking about. So if there's a problem that is extremely obvious in one of these markets, there's scenarios where we will co-develop solutions with those companies to show the market like the types of things that we can make possible with this new technology.
Got it. And mate, it's great to hear that you're also breaking those, borders down when it comes to reach, expanding beyond, those conference scenarios where we tend to, almost be in this crypto bubble where the same people seem to attend. This is going to be really key in the future as well, I imagine. So do you have more of these kinds of, Helsinki-like conferences and events that you'll be attending, year in, year out in the future?
Yeah, there are more coming up on the agenda for 2020, but I think more specifically, it's a broader strategy around business development, marketing, and then part of that is like attending events, right? So on business development, like we've just started building a very, very dedicated business development team that is like just very simply going after companies that meet these characteristics and talking to them about the types of things that we can do for them and with them. And so that's a lot more of a direct sales strategy almost, even though we're not selling anything per se because it's all open source software, but we're selling them on the idea of what they can make possible with our technology. Marketing, again, we now kind of have two branches of our marketing strategy, one focused on like the crypto community and the enabling characteristics of AION, and one focused on this new market audience around the Open Application Network. And so that marketing is going to be much driving awareness towards this brand new audience. I use as a simple metric, and on November 4th, for the first time, we announced the Open Application Network brand. What we need to do with that brand is break into a new target audience, not just repeat ourselves to the same audience we've been talking to for the last 3 years. So our big KPI and success metric on our marketing strategy is going to be, are we talking to people that are actually from the category of problems that we're speaking about, not just repeating two messages to the same crypto audience.
Exactly, Matt. And I certainly want to follow through on that with you along the way, because ultimately you're targeting utility, in that sense, especially in the enterprise field as well, because you want to make sure, once again, that use case is paramount. So once again, it's talking to all those different parties, educating them is the first step. But what about after that, Matt? Are you optimistic? Are you bullish that, from the emergence of this strategy and trying to interconnect with these parties, are you bullish that they're going to take on, the token, take on the technology and really start to not just play with it, but actually benefit from it?
Yeah. Most of the conversations that have either started development or are kind of in the later stages of like committing to a project are all, we're kind of skipping beyond, call it the proof of concept. We're skipping beyond the like experimental stage and saying, hey, if you're not interested in building something real with us, it's not worth our time and focus. So we're very much in like late stage conversations with a couple of meaningful companies that are wanting to build kind of meaty things on top of this new, tech stack that is the AION protocol, and the new packaging we've done with new tools and new SDKs that we're wrapping up in this Open Application Network brand. The goal is not, as you just kind of hinted at, the fact that these companies going to be taking exposure in the token. The goal is not to expose these companies to the cryptocurrency aspects of the protocol. the goal is to introduce to these companies that this system is effectively like a neutral infrastructure on top of which they can build an open application. The way you use the system is you're paying for computational resources in the form of the token, right? So the token the coin only really comes in the fact that you're paying for gas or energy within the system to actually like get transactions executed on the blockchain.
Right.
But that's sort of unrelated from the end developer. We don't see most of those use cases being payment by nature. We see them being a little bit more generic than that.
Got it, and that's good to know. Now, speaking of the overall security and the network itself, node operators is one thing I wanted to talk to you about, with regard to the OAN. Can you tell us a bit more about the plan there?
Yeah, I mean, so we launched on November 19th was the hard fork, which took us from being a purely proof of work mining system. And on November 20th, we effectively mined our first staking block. And so now the system is operating what we call units to the protocol. And every other block now rotates from being produced by a miner, followed by a staker, followed by a miner, et cetera, et cetera. That's now been active for just over a week, and we've gotten extremely positive responses to that. I'm just looking at the dashboard right now. There's now just north of 60 million AION that have been staked into the protocol, which is, by our measures, about 15% of the overall supply. Our goal was to get to about 100 million before the end of the calendar, and on trend to get there. So 60 million AION staked against, I think, 31 pools. So 31 independent owners. Let me double check. 31 registered pools.
This is a good sign, Matt, as you check, because essentially this means that people are not only, adding to the security of your network, but they're believing in this transition, believing in this expansion of the OAN.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for one, it's been really exciting to like re-engage with the community on this because they've been waiting for this for a long time. We've been kind of actually interact with the protocol in a new way. It gives them I'd say a sense of kind of contribution. Like they're actually providing value back to us through the form of like added security to the network. So everybody who participates in staking is effectively making it more expensive for the network to be attacked. And so that's like a joint community effort at this point. We continue to have a really, really loyal following of a mining community that has been extremely loyal to us since we launched the network in April of 2018. And they continue to mine blocks, every other block now being mined by miners. And now we've got this new group of kind of very engaged stakers, many of whom the pool operators that are, and it's not too dissimilar to mining where you have the ability to mine directly into the protocol on an individual basis, but often people will aggregate and mine through pools because it's more efficient use of resources. And similarly on our staking side, you can stake directly if you wanted to, or you can participate in a staking pool. Many of these staking pools are top branded staking pools coming from other well-known ecosystems, pools that are operating on Tezos, on Cosmos, on Terra, on others, on EOS that have added support for the OAN as part of this last release. So we were super overwhelmed. I mean, originally, frankly, when we started setting out objectives for this launch, our original goal was let's make sure we launch with somewhere between 6 and 8 staking pools. We launched with 26, and we were like completely blown away by the speed of kind of uptick because people heard about what we were doing. That we showed them kind of the documentation and the economic design, and it was really easy to get people to say yes. So now we're at 31 staking pools, and I think another 5 or so that are intending to join in the next week or two that we've been following and keeping up to date.
Well, Matt, congratulations on that success, quite sincerely, because as you said, the expectation, was very different to the outcome. You were much more successfully anticipated, and it all comes down to obviously that staking model as well, because that is quite a popular topic right now in terms of the incentive structure of staking itself. Can you just touch on that just briefly? The benefits of staking for those, and also it's important to note that you're one of the first, if not the, to transition from proof of work into the proof of stake model successfully, and that's not easy to do.
Yeah, as far as we know, and I think this is still true unless there's a protocol that I'm not aware of, we're the first ones to do that on a live network. So we started off, we've been a year and a half as a mining network. We've now forked into a proof of stake function in addition to our mining function. That was, for one, I mean, kudos to our engineering team. That was a technical obstacle in and of itself that was pretty challenging, but we spent a year or so kind of designing our way through that. And the rollout had a lot of people nervous, myself included. It went as flawlessly as we could. We went from one block next, and we had done a huge amount of testing, and we had run a very specific kind of a security audit, and we did an economic audit on the types of incentives that we were building into the system. One thing that did change in the process of this fork is we changed the underlying economics of the network. The underlying economics of the network, which used to be that on a consistent basis, there would be 1% of an inflation metric effectively calculated as a block reward. And that block reward year over year would maintain at 1%. So the unit number would go up as the overall supply went up. And now what we've done is we've sort of flipped it, and we've said, hey, let's make it a flat reward per block that starts at 3% but reduces over time. So because it's a flat reward, as the overall number grows, the percentage goes down. So in year 2, it's closer to 2.9. In year 3, it's closer to 2.8, et cetera. It kind of like trickles down over the course of the life of the network. What that means is that now on a block by block basis, every block that is successfully mined or staked wins 4.5 AION. Today, if you're a staker, again, going back to this dashboard that I'm just pulling up for reference, that means in its current numbers of how many people are currently participating, you're annualizing about 12% return by staking in the system. So you're putting your coins in, and on an annualized basis, you'd get 12% more. That number, that return number, reduces as more people participate, because as more people participate, they're effectively competing for the same pool of rewards.
I see.
We expect it'll find kind of its equilibrium somewhere between 6 and 8%. So the outcome will likely be that you'll earn somewhere between 6 and 8% on an annual basis.
And Matt, you really are changing, the whole paradigm. Really, you're part of this whole, I guess, revolution, in that people literally are looking towards new digital assets that aren't actually securities to function in a way where they can see, incentives turn into financial rewards, and it's quite unique. In that sense, are you optimistic about global support in terms of legal support? We've seen the moves from the CFTC and the SEC, but I imagine, they're moving in that direction as well.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't engaged with regulators in many years. We've been fortunate that there's not been a recent risk for us. But the way, like, I kind of remind myself every once in a while that this is still like an ongoing, very open landscape where the rules are still being formed as we go. The one very, very simple metric I use when I think about like the vulnerability of our project from that perspective, from a regulatory perspective, it always is like, could the network continue to exist if our team turned off its lights? Would the network stop existing if we just shut down? And in its purest form, we have nothing to do with the operation of the network. We don't run a single node. We don't mine. We don't stake. All of the network's activity is actually being managed by third parties. So in theory, we have nothing to do with the operations in the network. All we do as a team is we publish the software that allows people to run that network. But that could be done independent of us if needed. It is an open source project, right? So when this became a consideration in the Ethereum community, it always had been, what's the role of the Ethereum Foundation in the operations of the Ethereum network? And similarly, nothing. The Ethereum Foundation does not play a role in the Ethereum network. It plays a role in governing kind of the community and stewarding the actual direction of the technical roadmap, but then the network is run by independent third parties, and that's the same thing with us. So we're pretty confident that that's not a risk area that we're that should come up anytime soon for us, compared to a lot of our peers that are still managing extremely centralized, coordinated networks where there's like maybe a handful of nodes all being run in the same data center by the same system and managing.
I think you raise a very important point there, Matt. And often, under the guise of decentralization, when in fact they still are, very much a limited number of nodes and not really embodying that true ideal of decentralization, or even the reality as you start to move forward. It's also good to hear that you're relaxing more and more, from any degree of oversight, and obviously you mentioned stewarding this. Eventually, that will even relax more, where it just becomes authentically decentralized. The point that's worth mentioning, that's a big part of our economic design, and we published our economic paper a couple of weeks ago. If people are interested, it's on our blog. But the big emphasis is not that the long-term economics of the system do not come from block rewards. So in the short term, you have these block rewards, pay people for so the protocol is generating a reward for people as an early, short-term subsidy to maintain security of the system. Over time,
that subsidy gets supplemented by transaction fees that are being earned by miners and stakers. So the more people building on the system, the more there's a fee market developing inside the system, because people have to pay for access to the virtual machine. They have to pay for access to the, the fractional capacity of the network. That becomes a greater percentage of the return that a miner or a staker is earning. So they might earn, half of the reward from.
Right. Matt, I'll just jump in there because the connection is quite bad. But just to reiterate what you're saying, it's really interesting that there's going to be a transition from, right now that staking incentive to one in which those who use it, or more so those who really support the OAN because of its utility value. The more robust that becomes, the greater, the reward there. So I like that, hearing from you that once again, you're really pushing for applications, you're really pushing for use, and your whole economic model is, focused on that direction, it seems.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Your succinct summary.
Well, Matt, obviously you're busy, but I wanted to clarify a little bit more about AION as well and the AION holders, because obviously they're still very relevant, for that underpinning technology that's not going away. That's integral to the OAN. They haven't been left out, in the cold in any way, have they?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this system, it only exists because of the economic design of it. So this system only exists because of the AION coin, and it only exists because of the AION coin holder. What we've done with the Unity launch is we've provided a mechanism for these people to very directly add value back into the network, so that there's a two-way street. The network is benefiting from the coin holder, and the coin holder is benefiting from the network. So we're going to continue to have a very, very specific and dedicated focus on making sure that the coin holder community understands that value proposition. We do have our marketing strategy and marketing budget going towards purely the AION brand and the coin holder market to make sure that people are very well aware of the benefits of participating in AION.
Just lost you again a little bit there, but that's good to hear, because obviously we want to make sure that they are still part of, there's still strong support for that community as well, because obviously they were the ones that made it possible for you to have this conversation now and develop into OAN as another extension of the broader space and ecosystem. Now, verticals as well, Matt, let's talk about that more specifically. In the context of enterprise, it can be quite nebulous. I want to break it down to understand exactly where you're going with in terms of e-commerce, mobility, content sharing, loyalty. These words come up, but what does it actually mean? You can't tell me because of NDAs specific names perhaps, but you can tell me where you're really pushing for in terms of that enterprise area.
Well, and I'll tell you for kind of a lot of our product focus right now. This theme that we're working on is our product called Open Economy. And Open Economy does not specifically or exclusively focus on any one vertical, but the idea that inside of many ecosystems, there's a need to create a new form of asset to create better economic alignment between stakeholders. So if you imagine a YouTuber and his viewers and advertisers that want to advertise on that YouTube channel, they all have varying economic interests, and there are ways to create interesting assets that exist within an ecosystem like that to align economic interests, right? So what we've built with Open Economy and what we're going to continue building kind of various integrations and tools on top of is the ability for any application inside of one of these marketplaces or any type of like stakeholder inside of one of these marketplaces to generate and create their own little microeconomy themselves with their counterparties, right? So that could be a merchant and a customer on Shopify. That could be an Uber and his drivers on a driver and his passengers on Uber, or a video streamer and his viewers on YouTube or Twitch or whatever the case might be. So the first vertical is not so much one market; it's more one use case around the ability to create and generate your own microeconomy, and then create the rules of that economy, and then make that economy transferable and interoperable with other economies. So if I have an economy powering let's say my YouTube. Let's use you as an example, Brad. You decide that you want to find a more direct way to incentivize the loyalty of your viewership, so that you can actually send and communicate and send benefits directly to your viewers. But you might also want to do that in a way that if you decided to leave YouTube one day and go and stream on a different platform, that you could continue that relationship with your viewers on that other platform. Today, those relationships are bound to the single marketplace that you meet them on, right? So YouTube locks that characteristic in, and Twitch locks that characteristic in. So for us, it's kind of like extending that outside of those marketplaces, making it easier for people to have like direct relationships with their counterparty stakeholders.
I see. It's a really good idea. And I like the analogy too, or the statement you made about a network of economies. Really, that's where you're, trying to build, not just necessarily on focusing on verticals. But Matt, in that context, I know you, I've talked to you a few times now, mate, and you are well connected, especially, in sectors outside of crypto as well. Give us some hints, mate, because I'm sensing that, you are talking to some people regarding the OAN and regarding, this all-important economy focus. I suspect you're talking to some substantial economics of the future.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to put me in a corner here, Brad.
I'm trying.
But let me put it this way: there's two, maybe three categories of companies that we're actively pursuing. So one, and the one that you'd probably be most excited about, is like, who are the tier one, global online market operators, right? So in that category, these are the brands that everybody would think of when they think of like major tech companies in Silicon Valley. In some cases we have ongoing conversations. In some cases we're trying to break through the door. We're trying to get an audience with a decision maker in a couple of these companies. But there's the tier one companies, and in some cases we're thinking, that's going to be our best path to market. Tier one, say, hey, let's work around it. So, in the ride sharing example, it could be Uber, it could be Lyft, it could be regional players like Grab or Didi, right? So, and there's specific reasons why one might be more motivated to do this than the other. What we're finding is that often the category king in any one of these markets has little reason to actually shift their behavior because they own all the economics as it is. So the second tier player might have a more specific reason to kind of try to leapfrog and design their economic models a little bit differently. And so that's kind of the first overall category of types of target audiences for us is platform operators. The second is a little bit more nuanced. It depends on which platform you're talking about, but I'd call them platform-dependent companies. And a platform-dependent company, in my mind, a company that builds its businesses on the back of another company's infrastructure. So if I'm an app developer, my app is available as a plugin inside of the Shopify marketplace, then I'm dependent on Shopify to go to market, right? So I'm become a marketplace, like a platform-dependent business. And so there's a lot of really interesting use cases. These tend to be kind of small to mid-tier companies, but they work directly hand in hand with some of these larger marketplaces. Mm-hmm. And those are generally the two buckets that we're going after right now. Yeah. And some companies are kind of coming to a little bit of self-serve, that are the small platforms starting to get off the ground and wanting to bake some of these designs into their business right up front. But our target companies are some of the bigger tier ones.
Got it. And, I do apologize for the listeners for some of the connection issues we've had. But, Matt, it's great to hear that there's different, scenarios here for use case. And certainly you're looking at a broad spectrum of consumers and users. Now, right now, are you sensing or are you noticing a lot of interest from, general developers around the globe when they look at the open source tech, when they try to experiment with the OAN? Is it likely we're going to see an influx significantly of that experimentation at the developer level?
Well, I'll say yes and no. And I think one of the lessons we learned in, prior to the Open Application Network, in our more the AION strategy we've been pursuing for the last couple of years, is that there's this mentality in our industry of like kind of build it and they will come. If you make the technology available, people will show up and use it. Right. And I think it's a simplification of how developers consume, new tools and new technologies. I think in most cases, what we're now finding is that we actually have to verticalize a little bit more and actually go up the stack and not say, hey, you can theoretically build anything on this protocol, but here's examples of 3 things you can build. And
that's a good point.
And we've half built it for you. A very simple integration guideline and path for you to plug it into your business. So we're doing a lot more of designing solutions rather than just designing the protocol. So now we've got our underpinning protocol that needs to be continuously improved, but now we can actually start designing vertical solutions on top of the protocol and then exposing those to developers through very simple integration guides and SDKs that we can make available so that they don't have to kind of reinvent them.
Right. And Matt, having spoken with you last in part one of this discussion, it was very clear that you have really focused on building out the products, building out the SDKs, for example, so that even more so, it's going to become more seamless and easy for these parties. But most importantly, the proof of applications, you're making sure that happens. And driving that. So it's going to be interesting to see how many of these enterprise-related economies emerge, that are obviously also applications in the future that start to reinforce and attract the attention more so of a broader landscape of developers, not just those individuals either, Matt, but also developers that are backed by enterprise parties as well. And significant ones. That's what I'm hoping really for you to showcase in the next, months and years. Now, moving back to categorization, there was references to AION and also the OAN being a third categorization beyond the discussions of we see it here of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Do you want to just talk a bit more on that? Conceptualizing what you represent now, which is more than just AION and OAN separately, as this categorization of digital assets.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is maybe overly simplistic, but if I think about the way we categorize companies in buckets of competitors based on what problem and industry vertical do they operate in, right? So we would not consider Uber and Airbnb to be competitors because they're solving two completely different problems, even though they have similar characteristics. They're both online marketplaces. In that context, I think like what we've done poorly as an industry is we've thrown everybody into the same bucket and said, hey, they're all cryptocurrencies. They're all directly competing with each other. When in reality, all of these digital assets have different purposes. I mean, let me caveat that by saying some have no purpose, but the ones that do have purpose have different purposes, right? So Bitcoin, for example, and Ethereum, I do not categorize as comparable or competitive technologies because they don't intend to solve the same problem they don't profess to. These are not companies, obviously, but if I think about Bitcoin and try to simplify it down to its like purest form, Bitcoin effectively is a monetary system that was built to be money without government, right? It was a stateless currency. Whether or not it's succeeding in that is a matter of opinion, but those who believe in Bitcoin believe in it because of that characteristic. So I think right. Bitcoin is competing almost on its own in this category of stateless money. Ethereum, on the other hand, never professed to be building stateless money. It professed to be building an infrastructure on top of which we could decentralize the internet and change, the way that we build user-centric applications in the future. And so I'd say Ethereum and most of the alternative smart contract platforms that have existed to date, us included up until very recently, were effectively trying to solve the same problem as Ethereum. So then in that category, you actually did have a bunch of competitors. Ethereum and Algorand and Cardano and EOS, they're all sort of like different technical takes on this problem, right? But that problem statement was very focused on like, let's rebuild every online business in a new way. So if somebody said, hey, if you don't like Uber, then the Ethereum answer is let's build decentralized Uber. Or you don't like YouTube, let's go build a decentralized video streaming service, right? So, and that's fine. I think there's merit to that, but it's a very different time horizon than what we're working on. When we started building up an application narrative, it was what are the current problems that exist in the market today? The current companies that are operating and that are managing significant parts of our daily economic lives. And what can we build for them that is immediately valuable in the short term? So that's towards a very different category of customers. And this is where, I kind of see us going in a very different direction. And not to say that we're not all trying to solve similar problems long term. But in my mind, you might put us and Ethereum as kind of like, hey, one of us is doing ride sharing and one of us is renting scooters. And both are changing mobility, but which one is which, I'll leave that up to the viewer to decide. So what we've tried to make very clear is that means that we are not pursuing a strategy that tries to convince an Ethereum company or an Ethereum developer to leave Ethereum and come to the OAN.
Right. That's important.
That is true. Most all out there, right? If you went to the Ethereum developer conference 2 months ago, you would have found that at the Ethereum developer conference was Tezos, was Casper Labs, was Ethereum Classic, all competing with Ethereum for its developer community. We're saying, you know what, let those guys squabble over what is a very small market to begin with, and let's go focus on real world businesses that are large scale, and in some cases, $1 trillion problems that are emerging and are becoming very, very impactful in the way we live our lives every day. So that's the category that we're excited about. The open application narrative leads to this, very basic translation of what that means for AION is that you can't build open apps without having a global infrastructure that powers those open apps. And that global infrastructure happens to be economically validated and secured by AION. And so that puts AION as a digital into a category on its own from our perspective.
I see, and it's almost like the OAN's oxygen is AION in one respect, because it's symbiotic, really. You can't remove one from the other in terms of what you're actually trying to build holistically. So I think that's why I had to ask the question to better understand how you're moving in your own direction, in your own light as a digital asset for the future.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So just finally, Matt, 'cause I know you do have to go. Can you talk to us about the plan for OAN in terms of the future, whether or not you're going to raise capital as for equity stakes? Because we know that right now you're pushing for more people to understand the value proposition of OAN as a genuine utility-based aspect of the overall design. But what about in the future in terms of, say, for example, someone wants to have a security-like investment in OAN?
So two comments there before I jump into that. One, I guess the first thing to clarify for people is if people are interested or curious about our financial position, we continue to be in publishing our financial reports. And so our Q3 financial report, which is the most recent one that we published in October, is available on our website. Effectively, to give you the long form, long story short, it'll tell you that we're sitting on somewhere between 2.5+ years of operating runway in front of us at current operating costs. So, not to say that is a limited amount of capital, but we are not in an immediate need for new capital. We are operating on the basis that this is a problem that we're going to solve in the near future, but not right now. And that does not include the fact that we still manage a relatively large treasury of AION. So we still own, as a foundation, a lot of AION. Call it about 25% of the overall supply. And we've been very, very deliberate to not sell that into the market so that we could keep it for future financing requirements when the time would arise. And so that's something that we're revisiting later in 2020 and even into 2021. We don't have the structure today that allows us to consider raising equity. We are purely a nonprofit structure from the top down. So there is not a single shareholder in this business, myself included. So there is actually no ability for us to issue stock or sell stock. And so right now, our form of financing in the future is going to look like one of two things. One, we're going to find ways to bring large investors into the asset, into the token itself at some future date. This is not a priority that we're looking to address in the next 12 months. And then following that, we are looking at alternative models where subsidiary projects of the foundation could potentially earn and generate revenue that pay dividends back into the nonprofit as a way to fuel kind of long-term financial requirements.
I see.
But we're fortunate enough that this is not an imminent dire need for us to be thinking about.
I think I think it's fortunate also for those who've been supporting you all this time as well to hear that, because what is good to know, Matt, is you clearly have a vision for different ways, perhaps to broaden the scope, more importantly, of your whole network in the sense of reframing things so that perhaps applications, for example, that are going to be working with and haven't even been established yet, can once again reinforce the value of both AION and the other assets that you build inside the ecosystem.
Yeah. No, I think that's and we've been careful to be very conservative with our financing and to be very careful with the way we manage it and the way we report it. That's going to continue to be a top priority for us. And I think, there are really creative ways that we have been discussing among our board of directors and our group of advisors around future ways that we could monetize the foundation without sacrificing the fact that we are first and foremost a nonprofit governing an open source technology project. So we need to keep that kind of core to our mandate, but still look for ways to maintain, to build financial sustainability in the future. So we'll probably have a lot of thoughts next year.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're very busy. You're home now, which is rare. And once again, for all the listeners, we do apologize for the internet connection when it did lag at some stages. But Matt, thank you very much. As someone who is the leader of a very prominent infrastructural technology and now, expanding and leading the charge for the OAN as well. We do wish you all the very best, mate, because we do want to see utility, lead the way. We want to see use cases emerge, and certainly, underpinning technology is important, and you have that with AION. Now it's time to prove it with more and more business being done on the blockchain. So, mate, keep going, keep building. Is there anything you'd like to do to add to this discussion, as the summary from the previous part one, to really let people know that you're here to stay for the long term?
Yeah, I think, one thing I'll point out, because it's a recent announcement we made yesterday, and there'll be more news coming out about it in either later this week, if not next week. Part of this is also an ongoing commitment to make sure that our protocol is improving and the characteristics of our system continue to address kind of requirements we're hearing from users. So one area of investment that we're making from a research and development perspective is in the area of privacy. And so we made an announcement yesterday around the fact that we're very significantly going to be exploring, and we've published, in fact, our first technical roadmap and our first technical prototype around what it means to build private applications on top of a public infrastructure. And we think that's going to be a pretty critical role to some of the types of applications that we're going to need to enable. When we start interacting with things like sensitive user data, and when we start interacting with sensitive types of transactions that maybe a business does not want its competitors to see, the way that we build privacy into these public networks is going to be very critical. So for those familiar with the area, they might find it interesting to read our latest blog post. And then next week, we'll have some follow-up news around what we're doing specifically on that privacy roadmap, with a pretty significant announcement on the back of that. So this is going to be a set of tools around that developers are going to be able to get access to, that are going to be, how do you build private applications on top of a public network?
I can't wait to read more into this. Obviously, that you'd be aware there's already some controversies with some of the other privacy-focused protocols. We saw recently, some questions even raised about Mimblewimble. So right now, to engage more in the enterprise sector, it's absolutely imperative that there be means in which privacy can be supported on a public blockchain. That will expand your business immensely, getting that right. So once again, Matt, this is just the beginning for you, I imagine, and there's a lot of work to do. That's why you're so busy. But we do wish you all the very best as you continue to expand and build this network, mate, because you're not quiet, you weren't idle, you kept building in that bear. You're still there, you're still going with your team, you're still expanding the team. And kudos and congratulations for this endeavor, because proof's in the pudding. The tech will speak, and it's only a matter of time before we see more use cases emerge.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brad. It's always good catching up with you.
Likewise, mate. And until next time, we'll catch up. But it was the CEO from AION and also the OAN right here, right now, telling us exactly what they've been doing of late. Thanks, Matt Spoke, for your time.